If you laid eyes on Terminator 2D and thought, okay, it's just another action game with a Terminator skin, I get you. But the truth is, this game is packed with small details, the kind that fly right by you on the first playthrough, that act almost like a secret handshake for fans of the movies. So today, I've separated 7 hidden details in Terminator 2D that connect the game directly to the films, and some are so subtle that once you see them, you can't unsee them. I'm Matthew, so let's hunt down these secrets together. This was one of the most Terminator solutions possible. When the game can't have the franchise's most iconic face, it turns that limitation into a visual language, while simultaneously using a super specific and licensed cameo to say, yes, this is real T2. The absence of Arnold as the official image pushes the T-800 toward a more generic, pixelated look, much more machine than movie star, while the presence of Michael Edwards functions as a seal of authenticity straight from that unforgettable opening of the movie. The most interesting part is the reason. Licensing the film doesn't automatically guarantee the licensing of an actor's likeness. The publisher explained that they had the rights to use the Terminator as a character, but not Arnold's likeness. That's why, in materials and artwork, the game leans the T-800 more toward the endoskeleton Terminator itself side, rather than that face everyone associates with T2. Honestly, this changes the mood. Instead of looking like Arnold in 16-bit, it becomes a cold symbol of the machine, which fits the retro and arcadey vibe the project wants to convey. Now, where the game really pulls a masterstroke is with the Michael Edwards cameo. The studio/publisher literally went after him to close a likeness deal and put the adult John Connor from the T2 opening scene into the game. This detail is delightful because it takes a character who appears for mere seconds in the film, that scarred John with the binoculars and commander posture, and transforms him into playable, raw material, as if the game were expanding a micro moment from cinema into an entire level. And since the cameo is licensed, it's not just a reference or a lookalike. It's the game staking an official claim to that specific image of the future. To me, the weight of this is almost emotional. It's as if the game is saying, okay, maybe the pop icon, Arnold, isn't here the way you imagined, but the heart of T2's future is, and it's here in the right way. Michael Edwards is a fan deep cut because anyone who remembers that opening remembers the immediate impact. In a few seconds, the movie sells you on the fact that there is a war, there is leadership, and there are scars, both literal and historical. The game takes advantage of this face to anchor the future war in a spot that doesn't depend on celebrity nostalgia, but on atmosphere and continuity. It's also a creative choice that, ironically, brings the game closer to the spirit of the 16-bit era. Old licensed games lived on workarounds, sometimes due to technical limits, rights, or budget. And this ended up creating alternative versions of characters that developed their own identity. Here, the lack of Arnold pushes the art toward a T-800 that is less famous human and more walking weapon, which speaks to the very idea of the Terminator as an impersonal threat. At the same time, Edwards' cameo doesn't leave the game detached from the movie. It ties the experience to a very concrete memory of T2 that fans recognize instantly. And there's one last touch that makes it even smarter. The context itself reinforces how underrated this opening scene John is as an icon, because he is, in a way, the first image of the resistance leader in T2. And that is exactly the kind of thing a game can explore better than cinema. Even general sources on the character remind us that John appears as a child, Edward Furlong, and also, briefly, as an adult played by Michael Edwards at the start of T2. So, in the end, this hidden detail isn't just behind-the-scenes trivia. It's an official bridge between the game and one of the most striking frames of the film, built with creativity precisely where they couldn't do the obvious thing. This detail of the labs looking very Cyberdyne is one of those connections that needs no dialogue. You catch sight of the cold architecture, the signage, and the organization of the place, and your brain auto-completes. Okay, this is T2. It's not just a generic sci-fi setting. It's a conscious attempt to reproduce the feeling of the Cyberdyne building from the movie. That space that's too clean, too corporate, and for that very reason, terrifying when you remember what is being born there. What hits hard for me is the industrial, sterile aesthetic. Straight corridors, open areas with clinical lighting, doors and partitions that look corporate standard, and the idea that everything was planned to look safe and controlled. In the movie, this contrast is the soul of Cyberdyne. On the outside, a building like any other. On the inside, the kind of place where a technological breakthrough becomes a death sentence for the world. In the game, when the advanced levels place you in this territory, the art direction tries to capture exactly that contrast. And that's where the signage and office details become a language of horror. Placards, restricted areas, technical warnings, markings guiding employees. Except you, as the player, read this as the map of a nightmare. It's a great trick because it calls back to how T2 transforms a common corporate environment into a stage for chaos, pursuit, and despair, without needing to resort to a gothic castle or alien cave. This familiarity is what makes the tension work. Another thing that ties this connection well is the layout favoring set pieces similar to the movie. Spaces that seem made for a chase, lab zones where you imagine expensive equipment being destroyed, and technical areas that convey the feeling of vital infrastructure, power, security, research. Even when the game doesn't copy a specific room, it tries to reproduce the spatial logic of the building. First, the corporate side, then the research side, and finally the side where things shouldn't exist. This progression is very T2. And when you talk about mechanical horrors, that's where the scenery stops being just a reference and becomes commentary. Cyberdyne/Skynet in the game isn't scary because it's dark, but because it's functional. The horror comes from design that looks made by smart, well-paid people, and yet, or precisely because of this, makes room for inhumane things. Machines, experiments, production lines, metal parts, and automation that swallow any human warmth in the environment. I've always liked it when Terminator reminds us that the apocalypse doesn't start on the battlefield. It starts in a clean lab. This visual déjà vu acts as an emotional shortcut. You enter these levels and you aren't just playing a new stage, you are revisiting the paranoia of the film. The beauty is that the game doesn't need to tell you, this is T2's Cyberdyne. It puts you inside a space that feels like a direct echo of that building, and lets the viewer's memory do the rest. If you wanted, you could turn this detail into a script segment describing the sensation of recognizing the place even before understanding why, as if the scenery were a silent spoiler for the world's fate. This detail of adult John Connor as a playable hero is, to me, the game's most direct way of saying, now it's your turn to carry the future on your back. In the movies, adult John is much more of an idea, a promise, and a symbol than a character on screen all the time. And seeing the game put you in control of him at the height of the future war completely changes the relationship with the story. You stop hearing about the savior and start being the savior. The contrast with the cinema is what makes this shine. In T2, you spend most of the time following young John, and Leader John appears more as a vision of the future/anticipation than as a constant action protagonist. The game takes this gap and turns it into fertile ground, guerrilla missions, resistance operations, and that vibe of every move could give away your position. Things the movie suggests, but doesn't explore for long stretches with adult John as the focus. And then comes the personal impact, controlling. Adult John gives a different weight to every firefight and every screen advance, because it's not just surviving, it's leading. Even when the game is arcade and direct, the fantasy it sells is different. You aren't protecting the future, you are manufacturing the future by force, amidst scrap, fire, and machines. This is a lore expansion that works because it stems from an old narrative necessity. The franchise has always spoken of the future war as the Great Destiny, so letting you experience that firsthand is almost a debt paid. I also think it's smart because it repositions John. Instead of being stuck to the image of the important kid, he becomes an active combatant with presence and purpose on the scene. This even helps those who only know the movies vaguely, because you finally get to understand why everyone treats John Connor as the axis of the resistance. When you play, you see the type of mission that requires decision, courage, and coldness. And for fans, this tastes like finally, the myth becomes a character. There's another detail I really like about this choice. It reinforces the central theme of Terminator, which is responsibility. In the movie, the child John already carries a destiny that is too big. In the game, this destiny materializes into command, action, and immediate consequence. It's almost as if the gameplay translates the phrase, "no fate but what we make," into mechanics. You advance because you fight, you lead, and you persist. The recreation of iconic scenes, like the helicopter chase under the bridge, is one of those things that makes you pause the controller and think, damn, they really captured the spirit of T2 here. In the movie, that sequence is pure cinematic chaos. The T-1000 piloting the helicopter at high speed, the bridge as a stage for destruction, the sound of the engine roaring while everything collapses. The game takes this exact moment and turns it into playable gameplay, where you feel the weight of every maneuver, every shot, and every obstacle that echoes directly from that insane chase. What I love is how they mix fidelity with freedom. It's not a frame-by-frame copy, but a recreation that keeps the essence. The unstable bridge, the enemy chopper glued to your tail, debris flying everywhere. This creates a fluid transition between cutscenes, which flash visual references from the movie, and pure action, as if the game were saying, remember this? Now you're piloting the destiny. To me, it's an homage that transforms spectator passivity into total empowerment. And there's a personal touch that gets me every time. In T2, that scene is about urgency and survival, with the group racing against time. In the game, when you play this, it becomes a lesson in timing and arcade precision. Miss a jump or a shot, and boom, game over. Just like the movie where one mistake costs everything. It's as if the devs understood that the heart of the chase isn't just visual spectacle, but that tension of, will we make it or not, that Cameron built so well. Another brilliant layer is the expansion. The game doesn't stop at the bridge. It uses it as a hook for new scenarios that flow naturally, like destroyed urban streets or industrial tunnels that hint at the steel mill coming right after. These transitions make the entire level feel like an organic extension of the film, mixing the familiar with the fresh, leaving you with that feeling of, this could be in the cinema. I always revisit this in my playthroughs because it captures the frantic pace of T2 without falling into cheap pastiche. The emotional impact is what elevates everything. Controlling a scene you've watched 1,000 times in the movie connects you to the franchise in a unique way. It's not just nostalgia. It's reliving the hype of those VHS tapes we wore out watching, now with your own hands on the wheel. For those who grew up with Terminator 2 as the peak of sci-fi action, this is cathartic. The game gives you the power to rewrite those moments, proving the lore is still alive and pulsing. This recreation is the perfect example of how Terminator 2D No Fate honors the films without blindly copying them. It throws you into the middle of iconic action, lets you sweat on the bridge, and proceeds to expand the universe in a way James Cameron would approve. If you pause to absorb the details, the silhouette of the helicopter, the reflections on the water, the structural collapse, you'll see it's a literal bridge between cinema and gameplay that no one expected to be so precise and fun. These pixelated sprite cutscenes are like time capsules the game buries straight into your Terminator fan heart. They don't just recreate exact sequences from T2, but fill in those gaps the movie leaves to the imagination, like what happened between one explosion and another. Imagine seeing iconic fights, like the T-800 punching the T-1000 in the mall, transformed into fluid pixel art, with every frame echoing James Cameron's cinematic chaos. For me, it's the kind of detail that turns a retro game into a living love letter to the movies. What really grabs me is the precision. Iconic lines like "Hasta la vista, baby," or "Come with me if you want to live," come to life in text bubbles and animations that capture the exact timing of Arnold and the cast. It's not just copying, it's paying homage with a 16-bit filter that makes everything look like it came out of a 90s arcade dreaming of Hollywood. These scenes serve as a perfect bridge, injecting extra lore, like glimpses of how the T-1000 regenerates, or the panic within the group that T2 suggests but doesn't show in detail. And there's a personal touch I love. Growing up watching T2 on TV meant pausing the tapes to absorb every frame, and now the game gives you that in a playable loop, with sprites that flash subtle references like metallic reflection or combat stances. They fill narrative gaps brilliantly, expanding key moments without messing up the canon. For example, a cutscene might show the setup of a chase that the movie cuts away from quickly, leaving you with that satisfaction of finally seeing this happen. Another brilliant layer is how they break the arcade gameplay with narrative pauses that build tension. You go from an insane shootout to a cutscene recreating the Connor-Sarah family planning the next step, with pixelated expressions conveying despair and determination. This echoes T2's balance between pure action and human drama, making the game more than just a beat-em-up. It becomes an immersive experience, honoring dialogues that became eternal memes. I always get chills when a cutscene nails a fight from the movie, like the duel in the steel mill, with sprites colliding in pixelated slow motion that recalls the heat and sweat of the original scene. It's a direct homage that validates the film's lore, adding layers like subtle facial reactions or angles cinema didn't explore, all without forcing it. For those playing, it's like reliving the hype of T2's release, now with the power to pause and savor it. The movements of the T-1000 in Terminator 2D No Fate are some of those details that make your hair stand on end, because they perfectly capture the terror of the liquid metal from the movies. Those smooth morphing transitions where his body stretches, melts, and reforms as if it were alive and hungry. In T2, Robert Patrick sold this with cold stares and impossible changes, and the game recreates this in 2D with fluid animations that make the villain seem like an organic threat, not just a rigid sprite. To me, it's like reliving the dread of that mall chase, only now I control the pace of the nightmare. What truly chills me is the attention to detail in the transformations during combat. He doesn't just attack with sharp blades coming out of his arms, but changes shape mid-strike, stretching a tentacle or regenerating a lost piece in real time, echoing exactly how the T-1000 reformed after bullets or explosions in the movie. This creates iconic horror because, in pixel art, every frame of morphing is a visual reminder that you can never relax. One mistake and he swallows you back up. My heart always races in these fights, just like when I watched the movie for the first time on broadcast TV. And there's a personal touch that elevates everything. Growing up with T2 meant dreaming of the T-1000 as the perfect, indestructible, and unpredictable villain. And the game honors this with reactions that mimic the metallic flow, like him contorting to dodge shots, or extending to reach you from the other side of the screen. It's not just pretty animation, it's lore recreation, transforming what was an expensive special effect into a playable mechanic that truly haunts, making you sweat to survive like the T-800 in the steel mill. Another brilliant layer is how these fluid transitions break the rigidity of arcade 2D. While common enemies are predictable, the T-1000 morphs in patterns that force constant adaptation, recreating the desperation of the movie where no one knows what's coming next. I love pausing in these stages to admire how the pixels melt with subtle shading, evoking the silver shine of the original and making every boss fight a living homage to Cameron's psychological terror. I feel this is what makes the game's T-1000 immortal. The movements don't stop at basic attacks. They evolve, with him splitting into puddles or forming exotic weapons straight from the most iconic scenes like the motorcycle chase or the hospital. It's cathartic for me because it transforms the villain into something tactile. You hit, he morphs. You hit again, and the cycle of horror continues, proving the game understands what made the T-1000 unforgettable. Not brute force, but lethal fluidity. This detail of the pixelated fight behind the wall in the steel mill is the kind of thing only those who love T2 and pay attention to everything will notice. It's as if the game hid a mini-movie inside the level. While you play as John, way in the back, behind the wall, the 16-bit version of the epic fight between the T-800 and the T-1000 is happening, exactly in that final setting of the steel mill that left a mark on everyone in Terminator 2. What I think is genius is how this mirrors the movie itself. In T2, John often isn't at the physical center of the brawl, but everything happening between the machines and steel chains is because of him and the future he represents. In the game, you feel this firsthand. You aren't participating in the fight directly, you are witnessing it laterally, as if you were a privileged spectator of the clash that decides your fate. It's almost like watching a forbidden behind-the-scenes version of the movie in pixel art. And then comes the cruelest and most brilliant touch. If you stay too long, just watching this pixelated fight behind the wall, the game can simply kill John Connor, with the T-1000 managing to reach him. This mechanic is a very thematic slap in the face. Standing around, contemplating the heroism of others, instead of acting, literally costs the future of humanity. In terms of design, it's a very clever way to turn fan service into real gameplay tension. Personally, I love how this plays with our desire to appreciate the detail. The T2 fan player naturally wants to stop and see every frame of this fight, compare it to the movie, look for references, and the game responds. If you get too distracted, the future ends here. It's very Terminator. It's not enough to admire the sacrifice, you also have a responsibility in that world. The mechanic becomes a commentary on the very act of consuming nostalgia without acting. Another point that makes this detail even stronger is the use of the scenery. Steel mill, smoke, shadows, and that feeling of crushing heat, even in pixel art, recreate the atmosphere of the film's climax. The fight happening behind the wall seems distant, but the danger is immediate. You hear and imagine the confrontation, see flashes of movement, and at the same time need to maintain focus on John's survival right there in the foreground. This physical distance between you and the main combat only reinforces how every second spent standing still is a risk.